Right,
yeah, if I get up in a couple of minutes, you'll know.
Hey guys, you're here with the Educators Room. We are here tonight to discuss all things education. Before we start, guys, it is a historic election. Right now, we have our screens going, looking at results between the big presidential election, Joe Biden against President Trump. And as the electoral votes are coming in, we are watching them, but we're also going to talk education. So before we go on, my name is Francesca Warren. I am the CEO of the Educators Room, and I have two wonderful educators with us, with another one that's going to join us. Adam and Mike, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Go ahead, Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, everyone, I'm Mike Dunn. I work at a small independent school outside of Philadelphia. Been doing that work for about 10 years now. I work as the director of college counseling there and also teach classes in history when I get the chance to, and was trained as a history teacher and spent many years as a history teacher before doing college guidance work. And of course, when you venture down the tenuous path of understanding the past, you must also venture down the path of understanding politics, and then you just become enthralled. It's like a natural progression, right? Yeah. As Adam, I'm sure, can attest to. And once you become enthralled, it's hard to get out. So here we are, checking New York Times for, polling results, checking Vox for the Senate polling results, listening to your all questions out there, and hopefully giving you a little bit of insight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm Adam Sutton.
Oh. Mike, you're calling for what state? I'm sorry, Adam. What
state? Yeah, I live in the lovely state of Pennsylvania.
Okay, and I'm in Georgia, battleground state. All right, Adam, I'm sorry.
I am not in a battleground state. I am in the state of Maryland, solidly blue state tonight. If it goes Trump, then Biden's not winning tonight. But I have been teaching. This is my 13th year teaching. I'm currently teaching 11th and 12th grade here in Baltimore County, Maryland. I have experience also teaching social studies as a middle school educator for actually the last 3 years. And so, yeah, like Mike kind of alluded to, like as a teacher, I think that, you manage your classroom. And I wrote about this just recently, and I think teachers are political animals, and they, manage groups of people and try to get them to work together and achieve things both independently and in common. And so I think that to think that they're not political is ludicrous. And so tonight is a great chance for, teachers to be prepping for tomorrow. I'm going to be teaching tomorrow, so I'm going to be looking at what's happening and try to think about how I'm going to talk to my kids about this tomorrow. So that's a little bit about me and myself. And so I hope everybody enjoys the conversation tonight.
Yeah. And, so we talked about this off air. I'm in a battleground state. And for us, and guys, in the comments, put the states that you're calling from, you're listening to us from. And we also, underneath the screen, you can call in. So you can call in, you can leave a comment, kind of let us know what you think as we go into the topics. But I'm in a battleground state of Georgia, and COVID has been a hot button issue, from discussing, the reopening of schools, to the lack of testing that was happening, to the many deaths, the hospitals. I mean, this has been a really hot topic. I was just looking on CNN, and they were saying that COVID now this was Virginia reporting out that COVID-19 was the top issue, and racial injustice was the second issue that brought Virginia voters out. So in your states, what are the top button issues that teachers are talking about?
I think here in Maryland, like where I'm at, the conversation is around whether or not kids are going back in the building. We are, there are places in the state where there's some kids back. I think some of our rural counties had some kids back down in like Dorchester County, and I think that they actually took them, brought them back home. And so that is probably the biggest thing in my local jurisdiction, what people are worried about, because we are 100% virtual right now. And we are planning to bring back some students this month. It's definitely contentious. And so I think for teachers here, that's issue number one, is whether or not they're going to be in that classroom. And I think there isn't really a plan. That it doesn't. I feel like teachers don't feel like there's a plan. It feels like people are setting dates and saying this is when we're going to do this, but there's not really a plan and a structure in place that these metrics have to be met, and these are going to be the responses if those metrics change once we go back into classrooms. So there's just like a lot of hesitancy and a lot of worries about what leadership is doing in terms of leading. So I think that's the biggest thing here for teachers. It is COVID. I think that's issue number one for teachers right now.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, there's no other issues. It's like COVID and how to care for teachers right now. It's number one, and it's pervasive on the tongues of everybody. And I think the struggle for any state right now in this pandemic is the lack of consistent leadership has caused states to have to play cards that are very politically motivated. So it seems, right? They're playing cards they believe are motivated by public health concerns, but then the way that the pandemic has come across in, I guess, the media and the way the pandemic has sort of been dealt with around the country, it has become a political issue, right? And so if you're thinking from a district-wide perspective, you have, let's say, a single issue that parents are concerned about, like test scores. You pretty much got 30% of parents that are thinking one thing, 30% of parents that are thinking another thing, and then you got 40% of parents who are sort of like wishy-washy, could be swayed either way. With COVID, it's become so divisive that it's, in some cases, 70-30. 70% of parents are like, we want in-person school, and 30% are like, please no, don't subject my kid to this very dangerous experience, all the way to 50-50. And so you're left with superintendents having to make decisions that are based around public health when they're not public health experts. And there's no real infrastructure, particularly in rural communities or otherwise underfunded communities, which most school districts are, to be able to make public health decisions without having access to a real public health professional on hand. And, we're a little spoiled here because we're in big cities, Baltimore for Adam and Fran, Atlanta, and me, Philadelphia, that we have our local school districts do have access to some public health information, perhaps more than, let's say, Southern Maryland or Central Pennsylvania, where those decisions become even more challenging. Hey, Fran.
Before we go further, sorry, I had on mute. Like, I should know that, right? We're 7 months into a pandemic. Get off mute. So we're joined by Janaea Griggs, and Janaea is a former educator. Janaea, give everybody a little bit of your background in education, and then she's in Atlanta with me. But what do you think is in Georgia? What is the battleground issue? Because we're a battleground state.
Hello, everyone. As Fran said, I'm Janaea Griggs, and a former educator. I taught in the states of Texas and South Carolina before moving to Georgia. I now work for a nonprofit in the career and employment sector, specifically for the Atlanta Urban League. And as far as your question, restate that for me one more time, Fran.
What do you think is the battleground issue in Georgia? I said COVID. Adam, you said COVID. Mike said COVID. Is COVID the battleground issue in Georgia that's getting people out? Because in Virginia, it was COVID for like 52%, but then racial injustice was right underneath there.
So right before I got on this call, I saw some exit polling results on TV, and it was COVID was first at around, I think somewhere around 34%, but racial injustice was right behind it in the high 20s. So I think depending upon how racial injustice affects you personally, that may have been something that was right there with COVID as far as what's most important. But COVID is a pretty hot topic here. Being with the CDC literally being in our yard We have a lot of very well-educated professionals who have done a really good job of trying to spread the message. Not everyone has been accepting of that message, but they have attempted to share it.
Yeah. And so I have to ask, COVID being, teachers have been caught. I don't know if this is the only election, but I feel like the last 7 months, teachers have been directly affected by leadership in the highest office in the land, right? Because there have been these debates. I mean, I moderate a group, Janae moderates an education group, and there have been these debates where, I mean, literally, I just told someone I didn't know that opening school would be so controversial. And it's like educators have just been in the middle. Do you think that swayed how people were going to vote? Was there someone who said, I am a diehard Democrat and I need schools to be open. This is going to cause me to vote for Donald Trump, or the opposite? And I'm saying that because I think that teachers were caught off guard with just how nasty some of the debates have gotten. Or is this just in Georgia? Are people just battling this in Georgia? And I know right now we have Seattle, we have Kentucky, we have Illinois, we have Georgia in the house. So like, were teachers caught off guard, or did we know this was going to get so nasty?
I don't know if they got caught off guard, but everything seems to be so divisive now that it seemed to be inevitable that this too would get nasty. Everything has been nasty the last 4 years. So something as big as COVID-19 turned out to be, and because we were taking our lead directly from the federal government, I don't know if the teachers saw it coming, but I did. And the first time they shut down schools here in Atlanta back in March, I told my kids, I said, you won't be going back. Not because I won't be sending you back, but because schools are not going to. If they're going to close school, it's just there's very small chance that you'll be going back. Take all your things home. Bring everything home, because you will not set foot back in this building again. And they thought I was kidding. And when I was telling other parents, they were like, oh, really? You don't think? I was like, no, they're not going back. And here we are, November, and my children never set foot back in that building that they were in last year again. Not once. No, I didn't even go back to pick up report cards. Everything was outside in the parking lot.
I mean, I don't think that it was it surprising? I think it's been a little bit surprising to a lot of teachers, kind of the turnabout, because, in the spring, it seemed like teachers, like there was this talk about like, man, teachers are really making do and like doing the best they can in unforgiving and unpredictable situations. And it feels like that's shifted a little bit now, like as people tire, get the COVID fatigue, and they start thinking like, that teachers are being selfish by saying they want to stay home and saying that they're uncertain. So I think there has been a shift. But I also think that like that was one of the things that's like one of the problems with that I have about leadership at really all levels, federal and state and local even, is that it was always going to be easier to shut down than it was to open up. Opening up was always going to be a lot harder. And I don't think we've admitted that yet, even. And I think that makes it really, really difficult. So I don't know if it was like I think it was a little bit inevitable in a sense, just because I don't think we understood. Because let's be honest, like in none of our lifetimes have we dealt with infectious disease like this here in our country. Like it's not something that we're accustomed to or familiar with. So I guess in some sense it shouldn't really be surprising that we were in fact surprised.
I would just add to that the science is actually unfolding in front of us. And so to be privy to that is, excuse me just for a second, to be privy to that is to be in the middle of a hot mess, because science really is a hot mess. You're doing experiments and you're figuring things out as you go. And so to Adam's point is it was always going to be hard no matter what opening up was, because it's uncertain. The amount of information that we have has been so fast and so inconsistent, because that's how science goes. But we are often, as educators and just as people, as human beings, not privy to that process in front of our eyes. We sort of get the sanitized version. And so to watch it unfold has been, at least in my point of view, a fascinating happening. I would add the other thing to talk about here is that sorry about that. There's a lot of arguments in teacher preparation programs about being apolitical in your teaching, and to maybe not show students what your point of view is on certain things, or to not share with them like your beliefs in terms of your candidates that you're supporting, or what have you. But I think all of those comments sort of ignore the fact that teaching is an inherently political act. James Baldwin talks about how the act of teaching is an awakening of the consciousness that then produces people that are going to upend the system in which teaching is embedded, right? And in order to do that, it is an inherently political action. You're teaching people to challenge power, to ask questions, to do things that are critical in nature, and sort of maybe even pushing the boundaries, right? That's what we want our students to do. And so for teachers to not realize that they would be in the middle of this pandemic, and for it to be political and for it to be divisive, I think is for teachers to be awakened themselves, to realize that maybe my job is a little bit more political than I would have hoped or liked, for better, for worse.
I wonder around, because Casey just said something interesting in the comments. She said, I don't think teachers expected to be a big part of the national political debate. And to me, it's almost like, how did you not expect? Like, I wasn't as sure as Janaea in that we would be closed, but I knew that it was going to be bad. I just didn't think that 7 months later we would still be in this COVID, that there would still be more deaths. I thought that we would trust science, because you got to remember, the last 10 to 15 years, we have been pushing STEM. We've been pushing STEAM. We've been telling people that we need to bring science back. We've been pushing this. And now when we're in the middle of a pandemic, I gave us, I think, too much credit in saying, okay, the CDC will step in. They will tell us what to do. People will listen because they don't want to die. And it's been the complete opposite. And so, Mike, when you talk about, teaching is political, I think this has shown teachers that national issues, we know testing, right? But many people say, oh, testing just happens to, the kids and the teachers. It doesn't affect me. But when you have a loved one die, or your wife is being asked to teach in the middle of a pandemic, or your husband is the football coach, and that's probably very sexist, I gave those examples, but let's say he's the football coach and he contracts COVID and he gets sick and he's in the ICU. So all of these things, I feel like teachers, things are starting to go off and they're like, ding, 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 this affects me. But I have to ask, Dan says, we've also been told for 10 or 15 years from those above us how we'll be measured and how we can prove our worth. Right. So, I feel like this is like the season finale of a long history of teachers being asked to put themselves on the line, and teachers just saying, if I bury my head and work really hard, everybody will clap for me. And it's backfired, because now they're telling you to teach in a pandemic and just smile and be positive about it. So, yeah.
I read something today in regards to teachers teach for the outcome and not the income. And there's nothing that makes me more angry than something like that, because please tell your mortgage company that you're in it for the outcome and see how long you get to stay in your house. People have turned teachers into martyrs. I think, speaking of sexism, it's because it's an inherently female profession. I don't recall anyone ever asking a man to be in it for the outcome and not the income. That's police officers and firemen, and we're constantly looking for pay raises for those essential employees. And then we tell the teachers, it's okay, baby, you're in it for the outcome and not the income. And now we're saying you're in it for the outcome, not the income. And we don't care if you die while you do it, because we need someone to watch these kids. So those of us who are in it for the income can go get our income. It's inherently sexist. It's unethical at this point, and yet it's the norm for which we've been, operating at this time. No one's even questioning it. We're people who I thought were rational, fact-finding individuals have said some things during this pandemic that has me questioning, everything I thought I knew about what it means to be, an accomplished, intelligent individual, all because 10 or 15 years we've been pushing STEM. But where were we pushing before that? I didn't go to school where STEM was something that was being pushed. So all these parents out here, I'm almost 40 years old. A lot of the parents out there are not science and math savvy. These kids are doing math, in middle school that I was doing in high school. It's way over a lot of parents' heads. And I think this pandemic and the way the science around it has been received by parents is showing that a lot of us have some serious gaps in education. And I see someone in the comments saying that teachers are not missionaries. I said today to the comment about teachers being in it for the outcome, that it's a career, not a religious vocation. Priests are in it for the outcome. Nuns are in it for the outcome. Teachers have bills, and it's a career, and they need to be treated like the professionals that they are. And we are not doing that.
I have a question. So is this, and this might, people will get upset by this, but we've said this for years at the Educators Room, that because teachers don't get political, things are put on teachers that would never be asked of another profession with the amount that we make. Is this something that we have allowed because we have said we don't vote according to who's going to be best for public education? Do we take any of the blame? And that's just I just got to ask that. What do y'all think? As a profession, are we lobbying? Are we joining our unions?
I'll say a couple things to that. I think first is we let our own hearts bleed too much because we care about kids. Everybody who's a teacher that I know of, maybe I'm hanging out with just the right people, loves their students, right? But I'll tell you what, at the end of the day, if you don't love yourself first, it doesn't matter how much you love your students, because you got to have, just to what you're just saying, is you got to have your income to pay your mortgage, right? You got to have your income to pay your car bill or your electric bill. Those are non-negotiable, right. My mortgage company my bank doesn't love me and will not let me donate my time to them to pay for my mortgage. They expect one form of payment, right? And I need that from my job, right? And so I think that teachers, in my view, by saying, well, I do this for the kids, is a little bit counterproductive. I wish teachers that I knew drew the line more and said, I'm not going to do that, because you know what? That's not an appropriate thing to ask of a working professional. Number one, right? Number two, I would argue that by not stepping up and placing on the table the idea that teachers need to be compensated fairly, I believe that teachers are doing themselves a disservice by not stepping up and saying we deserve to be compensated like human beings with master's degrees, right? Because probably all of us here have master's degrees, right? And if you go and you work in the business sector and you have an MBA, you earn a 6-figure salary. That's how that goes. But teachers don't. And we're okay with that because people say you got to get a master's degree to be highly qualified. But like, no, I don't understand. Like, it's hard to say that. It's also, I think, hard to say because at some point you just have to say either I'm going to be compensated fairly or I need to find a new career for myself. And that's really hard to do when you love what you do and when you love students, But again, you got to love yourself first.
And Fran, I just hop in here. Like, I think you kind of were asking, are teachers at fault about this? And I don't, maybe a little bit. I think I agree with Dan's point about like saying that, we kind of, Mike's was saying about, teachers love their jobs. And so it kind of puts us in this trap. But one of the things about COVID that I think is going to be interesting, because I think changes are going to have to happen out of such a big event, is all of a sudden we have kind of looked around and we've said, wait a second, like we can't do certain things that we would normally do. And so some things have come off the table as far as like curricula. And for example, like last spring, like we were just like, oh man, we got to get rid of that. We don't have enough time. Like we can't, like things were just flying out the window. And it was like amazing to me that we were just sitting there. Like we've been talking about doing some other stuff and doing things differently for my entire career, a decade. And then all of a sudden last spring, it was like, wow, I thought we couldn't do that. But then all of a sudden in like 3 weeks, we could. And I kind of think like this is a moment. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of this thing, but all of a sudden, I'm teaching 100% virtual right now in my county, and I have Wednesdays off. And that Wednesday allows me to do things that I cannot do otherwise. I call more parents. I talk and message students more than I could possibly do. Granted, every day I have the advantage of seeing them in person normally. So now I have to send them a message. But I speak to more parents more frequently, week in and week out. And that's kind of a nice thing. We always say that's something we want teachers to do, but teachers will sit there and say, I cannot do it. Like there are only so many hours a day. I cannot call every parent. And now I have an entire Wednesday. It's nice that my leadership at my school is really good about not scheduling meetings, because I know other principals, I don't know if they don't trust their teachers or what, but they decide that they need a lot of meetings. If teachers aren't, teaching, they're obviously going to be wasting their time. Apparently, I don't know. And so that's kind of nice. And I think curricula wise, like we kind of look around and we're still doing less things from a curriculum standpoint than we would normally. And so I think that this is that moment where kind of teachers do have a chance to say, hey, wait. We're all of a sudden doing things differently. And if it's harming kids, then yes, we don't want to continue. But like, if I have more time to invest in like my families and the community that I work in, like it's like a good thing, right? Like, so maybe we cut down on a couple of those curricular standards and give teachers some time to be a member of the community, and that's positive. And so I hope that drives the conversation coming out of COVID. I really do.
And I think you guys brought up some great points. So, okay, we're going to pause for a second. Trump has won West Virginia. That's what we're getting from the AP. Let's see. Florida is still battling it out right now. Polls have closed in South Carolina. There's a hot race. Lindsey Graham, Jamie Harrison. Janaea used to live in South Carolina, right? So this has been a highly contested, with Jamie Harrison, running a very strong campaign, hundreds of millions of dollars in donations. And this has probably been the race that Leslie Graham, this has, like, as my kids would say, proverbially wore him out. I don't think he's ever campaigned this hard. So we don't know who's going to call that. We're also looking right now. Biden looks like he may win Duval County, which is home to Jacksonville. He leads by 9 points. So, this is getting hot and heavy. In Dorchester County, South Carolina, 14,000 absentee ballots are able to be read by scanning machines. This will prevent election officials from tabulating those votes tonight. It could mean some close statewide races will not be called tonight. It's getting hot.
I just want to say one quick thing, though, Fran, before we like say that places are called for people, right? It is our responsibility, I believe, as educators, as people who are occupying a media space right now, to make sure that we understand what exactly we're talking about when we say things are called. None of those things are real, right? All of those are projections by the media,
Yes.
And so we need to wait on, honestly, for state certified results before we can say anything. Because 4 years ago when I went to sleep, Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president of the United States. And then I woke up in the morning and she wasn't anymore. And so until I see some hard evidence that whomever is going to be winning elections in states, I'm not ready to comfortably say that anybody's won anything anywhere. Unless it was those 11 votes in like New Hampshire that voted at like 12:31 p.m. or something like that.
Yeah.
They're okay. Like I'll accept that whomever won that election was fine, But Florida, there's no way I'm making a call for anything, anything at all. And I would just say to anybody listening right now that you need to be aware that the results are contentious, that the mail-in ballots are not being counted at the same time as the in-person ballots, and that getting this information now about who's winning someplace is borderline irresponsible. I would argue that you need to wait. And nobody wants to be comfortable with that, but please wait.
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that, because you caught me, because I just got a tweet, the room where it happens, 350 mail-in ballots from Philadelphia County being extracted and flattened, trying to get them counted. That is a massive amount. And they're counted by hand. So, as we think about this, and in the comments we're seeing this, Dan says, Adam, you have a great voice for radio. Casey says we are reactive instead of proactive, and COVID really shows it. Now what's going to change? Like the day off during the week. Let me see. Dan agrees with you, Mike. He says exactly what my wife said about last year. She went to bed believing she would wake up with Hillary Clinton as president. And Susie says, for our history buffs, remember the Truman versus Dewey election. I'm not that old, but they called the wrong winner early. It had newspaper headlines. So this is a great point. Now, with that being said, because my 10-year-old and 12-year-old are upstairs watching, they have been glued to this election. They have been reading. They have been just like, oh my gosh. What do you teach children tomorrow when they come into class? Like, how do you facilitate these conversations? Because no matter how you vote, right? I know who I voted for, but how do you don't want to go into the classroom and just say it's another day. You want to educate children. Just like Mike said, whoa, hold up. I know they're projecting it, but there's no way we can call it right now. How do you go into the classroom tomorrow and kind of help navigate this for children?
Well, I'll take it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm not 100% sure even right now. And I'm supposed to be in my classroom in about 12 hours. So I'm not 100% on this, but I think one of the things that I know right now is I know the election's contentious, and I don't know how close it's going to be. I'm hoping that we get some sense about this as the night wears on. And so between those two things, I think I want them to think about, what about this race was off-putting to you, if it was off-putting, and what about this race to you gave you hope, if there was anything, and kind of think about those things first and foremost, to kind of ground ourselves in what the goal of an election really is. As a social studies educator, those are the kind of things I want to think about, and then that hopefully frames how we talk about this specific election, and try to. Otherwise, what you don't want tomorrow morning in your classroom is you don't want it devolving into the first presidential debate. That's what you're trying to avoid, where people are telling each other to shut up and people are interrupting, and it looks like that. And that's another reason why I think teachers are really good at politics. They manage a community that deals with a lot of controversial issues, a lot of really tough material, and it doesn't look like that first presidential debate. And that's why I think that teachers tomorrow shouldn't shy away, because they're good at this. They are good at talking about controversial stuff. They're good at framing these conversations in ways that kids can learn, people can learn, and they're safe and they feel comfortable talking about something contentious like this election. So tomorrow, I'm kind of trying to frame it around, what is the goal of a good election? What are you trying to get out of it? What is the benefit of this election? And I'll try to answer a lot of their questions, because I think that there is going to be some uncertainty tonight because of COVID and how the results come in. And so that it's going to be important to kind of, I think, stay up just a little bit late tonight and try to figure out where this thing is at, so that when I roll into class tomorrow morning, I have as good a conception as anybody can have.
Janaea, I think you were going to say something. What were you going to say?
Yes. While I no longer teach children, tomorrow when I speak to my clients who are heavily, unfortunately disenfranchised, because I deal with a population of clients who are within a few months of being released from generally the state or federal prison system, and therefore are not eligible to vote in most states, certainly not in the state of Georgia where I am. It's going to be a hot topic. It needs to be what's happening and why we're not calling elections, and what's different this year than the last election that they remember participating in. What's the difference? Why can't we call this election? I think is really important. A lot of people don't understand why we can't call it, or why we won't go to bed and know who's president. The current president claims to not understand why we won't know who's president, why we can't just know who's president tonight we go to bed. Like many people already stated, I didn't think Hillary Clinton was going to be the president when I went to bed. I stayed up that late. I knew it was looking a little sketchy by the time I went to bed. And when I woke up and found out I was correct, it was a little bit of a didn't see that coming moment. So I think we have to remember what 2016 looked like, and then we also have to remember that it's not the only close election. I spent the week of the election after the 2000 election sleeping on the floor of the Florida State House, demanding that every vote be counted, every hanging chad, because I went to school in Tallahassee, and so that's what I did. That was my first serious foray into politics. And I remember crying my eyes out and just not understanding why they couldn't count every vote. And that was when I decided that politics was something I really cared about. So tomorrow there are going to be some kids who are hurt. There are going to be some young adults who are hurt on both sides, either way, no matter who wins this election, who are going to have somebody explain to them why it went this way. And teachers are going to be the people who are there for them, who can explain the facts of what happened. Because a lot of times the adults in their households, they don't know what happened either. If you don't have a passion for politics, if you're not, dialed in all the time, you may not be able to explain that to your kids. But generally, I'm confident in knowing that when I send my kids to school, their teachers can, adequately and eloquently explain what happened, in a kid-friendly way, so that my kids will feel comfort in some way.
I love that statement, and I echo a little bit about that, and what Rena is talking about here is that, excuse me, I think it's important for school leaders to remember that their teachers are going to have fairly visceral experiences here, whichever way they voted. And I think that it's important to give teachers a little bit of space and slack to be able to react as human beings and, engage in conversation with their colleagues, because their colleagues are their friends and they appreciate their opinions, and to not always have the right answers and to sometimes make mistakes and all of that. So I would hope that school leaders are there helping teachers be okay as well in this time. And then from a teacher's perspective, I hope that teachers don't shy away from this conversation. you know, because this election is so, again, visceral, even for young people, and that schools are safe places for young people, I hope that teachers are able to say, hey, let's talk about this, and then actually hold like facilitated discussions with kids to help kids bring their points of view to the table, because they're still forming those things, and how do kids these days form their opinions? Like any kid, they get information from their parents, or they get information from media, or they get information from social media, or they get information from wherever, and they're still trying to like mash that together into like some sort of idea or sense that makes sense to them. And so it's important for teachers to remember that sometimes a kid might say something that you might have like a really strong reaction toward, particularly tomorrow. And you got to be ready for that, and that's why it's important for school leaders to also support teachers. So a teacher can come to their school leader and say, man, this kid really just said something that hit my buttons. I need a second here to kind of process that, and then be able to go back in the classroom in a professional manner.
And the reality is, and I like, the grace that you guys are talking about, because I can remember I've probably stayed up late watching every election but the last one. In my vote, and I'm 40-ish. So in the last 22 years. And so I remember the Bush and Gore, and I remember, different elections. I remember when Barack Obama was elected and crying. And I just remember. And so just giving people grace, right? And knowing how to talk through it. Let me ask you this, because a huge issue that we're seeing in the exit polls as they're talking to people is racial injustice. And I don't know if it's ever been polled high at a presidential election. For teachers, I've seen more teachers come out of their comfort zone and talk about racial injustice. As a Black woman, for me, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's just, I have to do it, right? But I've seen lots of non-Black teachers saying, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to address this. I don't care of the consequences. Do you think that that is a hot button issue with several of our teachers, and that caused them to get to the polls and take people with them?
I mean, I don't know if it was a voting issue, but I think you're definitely right about it being a teaching issue. Myself as a white man, I spent my first about 10 years teaching in all Black schools. So it wasn't as tricky to talk about race. I didn't think it wasn't really that controversial. Like, it seems like Black folks are actually pretty confident and comfortable talking about race. But now I teach at a much more mixed school. And it's dicier. Like, I mean, not like bad dicey, but like I got to be on my toes a lot more as far as kind of having that conversation, because it, like, just the idea that there are still racial injustices occurring is not always accepted. When I was in all Black school, like, saying that statement was like saying that Starburst are tasty. Like, nobody was going to disagree with me. And so I think that this year, 2020 COVID, has helped to kind of further that conversation, and for teachers to look around, because you asked earlier, about COVID and racial justice as being driving voting issues. But in a lot of ways, I think COVID is a racial justice issue. When you look at the disparities in who's being harmed, it shouldn't be a surprise that communities that have less access to quality health care would be harmed more in a pandemic. Like, that seems like a very logical conclusion. And so I think that, to your point earlier, yeah, COVID and racial justice issues, I think, are one and the same. And I think so that timing, we have talked about whether racial justice is a topic for the classroom. And I think COVID has allowed it to become, yes, this is a historical issue. This is a political issue. This is an issue in which kids need to be engaged, and they need to learn, and they need to talk, and teachers need to facilitate that. So I don't I guess I talked myself into saying, yes, this is a voting issue. I think that's how I did that there. I think I did.
Joanne says, I think most teachers are ready for that, but I worry about students providing grace for others. Rena has said, because I work with teachers all over the state of Missouri and our students are adults, I have some concern about teachers providing grace for one another. Janae, I think you were going to say something.
I was really just sitting over here thinking while Adam was talking about my experience. I've only ever taught at majority Black Title I schools in Texas and South Carolina. And you're right, handling the issue of race with my students was never an issue. However, I did have some issues addressing race with some of my colleagues because I tell people all the time, teaching kind of took me out of my my suburban Black girl bubble. I just kind of assumed that if you were a white person who ended up teaching at a majority minority school, that you would be open-minded to the idea of racial injustice, and that is not the case. That's an assumption that I think a lot of people probably make, and it's just not accurate. I ran into racist teachers while teaching at schools that were 99% Black. Some people are not, everybody's not in teaching or doesn't get to teach at their choice school. You go where you got a job, and because we just discussed this is a career, not a religious vocation, right? So you occasionally would run into a fellow educator who wasn't as open-minded about, say, Black Lives Matter didn't exist then, but just kind of the idea that every teenage Black boy wasn't going to end up in jail. Like I would run into like the most obvious of challenges and just couldn't wrap my mind around who let this guy or woman teach these kids every day. Like I would literally be concerned about the students. Like, how are they going to learn? How are they going to be successful in a classroom where the teacher's obviously biased? And it's this like it's undisputably biased. The rest of the people in the hallway figure it out. You're just waiting on the admin to figure it out and but no one's ever reassigned. And so, the wheel just keeps turning. And that's something that I think, as far as teachers giving each other's grace, I saw somebody say that in the comment. Teachers aren't always going to give each other grace in that accord, because we walk in with our biases. And just because we teach children, just because we teach low-income children, just because we teach Black children, does not mean that we have a grasp of racial injustice in society. And we have to be willing to learn what we don't know and be open-minded when we find that our inherent beliefs are inaccurate.
I would add to that and say that some of the most racist teachers I've ever met are ones that are working in like inner city schools, people that are working in so-called no excuses type models, where they're like, that are built on, and I wrote this in a comment, I think on our message board not too long ago, which is those models are built on a colonizer mindset. It's like, conform to this and you will get to this, but that's coming from an absolute deficit point of view, right? And some folks that are in teaching in those schools, and I'm not characterizing everybody here, obviously, but some folks that are teaching in those schools and other schools, really schools everywhere, are like, pick yourselves up by the bootstraps. There's nothing wrong with the world that you're coming from, and you're fine. Just work hard and you'll be a billionaire one day. And they just don't realize that that's not how things happen, that there are actual institutional concerns for young people and institutional mechanisms that are designed with hundreds of years of history to hold young people back, right? If you don't understand those things, then you're working from the wrong point of view, at least in my view, as a teacher. but I do think, back to the point that Julie's making over here in the comments, and Dan as well, and to your question, Fran, that the issue of race and racism, I believe, is an absolute voting issue right now. There is, this whole ad campaign that is being run either by Trump or some other like political action committees that are supporting the Trump campaign that is focused around the jobs not mobs message. I don't know if you've all have seen these advertisements. So basically it's like, what they're displaying as looters, and then they're contrasting that with people that are like, working in coal mines and working in steel mills and what have you. And so you see these two contrasting images right back and forth with one another. And that whole premise that things like what have largely been like 90% plus peaceful protests in the country over the last few months, right? That those things are being politicized to the point that they're saying no mobs. Like, come on, if that's not a clear racialized voting issue, then I'm not so sure what is. And if campaigns are using that, then people got to be aware of that. That is tapping into some inner racist thought there that, might be tingling in the back of your mind because of the privilege that you've grown up with. And it's kind of nagging at that, without you even realize. So you got to be literally woke. You have to be aware of what that propaganda is placing in your mind. And yeah, I could go on about that, but Fran, I'll let the next question come on in for you.
So we are, and remember guys, and Mike, thank you for saying that these are projections. More than 20 states will keep counting absentee ballots past Tuesday, as long as they were postmarked today. So in Georgia, as long as you have your ballot in by 7 o'clock in the outside, they will take it and they will count it. They're just getting word that Kellyanne Conway, former Trump spokesperson, has told ABC News that Trump will speak at some point tonight. They're discussing, it's 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and polls are closing in all or part of 20 states and the District of Columbia. Tons of voting machine errors and election day hiccups. And this is really interesting. Where there is a lot of Republican Democrats challenging Republicans in key races, and they are projecting that these are going to be very close. And results in some areas of North Carolina will be delayed because they have extended the poll time to 8:15 because they were open late. So this is going to be this is only 8:04. So this is going to be a long night. I have to ask, we're not going to be on all night, but I have to ask, whoever wins tonight or in the morning or 2 days from now or a week from now, it's called, what's the first thing that they do in office around education?
Sure, I'll go. How about, I'd like to see a moratorium on testing for the year, at least, a bare minimum. And I don't understand how it's even
1 year. Debate. Wait, what?
Well, hold on. I'm not done. And if we decide to do it for this year, that means we'll have done 2 years where we say, hey, you know what? Quality instruction can happen. Teachers can do a good job, and students can learn. And maybe this testing thing, we don't need to be doing this like every year. And I'm not even. I have been to the extreme and said no testing whatsoever. And I think there could be a place for comprehensive testing, in 2nd, 6th, 9th, 12th, something like that. But this like every year testing is exhausting for teachers. Kids don't see the purpose of it. And I don't think the data that's ever reported out really does anything except for make people pit school against school. And it divides our community. I cannot see how testing is not the easy first thing you do as president if you're talking education. That's it. Boom. Testing.
Yeah, testing A testing break would be nice. I just want to tell Susie that I'm a born and raised Texan or a proud Texan. And yeah, they made me feel a
Wait,
little crazy
are
too.
there not proud Texans?
I told
I'm just curious. I never met one of those.
There is no such thing. There is no such thing. There is no such thing. You're indoctrinated from
Right.
That's a story. Now that is a tale of education that probably no one has heard. That Texas pushes Texas history in a way that other states would just never understand. Like, I know more of Texas history than I do the United States history, and my minor was history. So I say that without joking. But it's as far as what the next president can do, or if Trump gets another term, I don't see DeVos going anywhere. She has an agenda. It has been made crystal clear. It is not in favor of public education. If Trump gets another term, she is what I would consider a Trump loyalist. She's not going anywhere. She is effective. Whether we agree with what she's doing or not, she is effective. So if we end up with another 4 years of Trump, the tests aren't going anywhere because there's too much money to be made in that lane. If Biden is elected, I do think that's a fast and easy thing that he could do that would immediately endear him with teachers and probably a nice chunk of parents as well. I personally do not think my children should have to take those state tests this year. My eighth grader has yet to set foot in an eighth grade classroom and hasn't been in a classroom since, March 12th of seventh grade. We're doing the best we can at home, but teachers can never teach their own kids for whatever reason. You can teach everybody's kids but yours. So, it's not even fair to even be on the table, but it's a financial thing with Betsy DeVos. It just kind of is what it is. But I think that, Adam, that is the easiest. They don't have to give us more money right now. We would like it, but that's not something that's going to happen in January. But that can happen in January. That can happen on day 3, day 2.
Yeah, I would argue testing, both coronavirus and education testing, both of those things I think go hand in hand for schools. So if you're going to ask me what's going to happen on day 1, it's going to be comprehensive coronavirus testing to help get schools back in person, and comprehensive strike down of comprehensive testing that schools would otherwise have to endure on a regular basis. But my day 2, I think, is all around school infrastructure. I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown is that most of our school buildings are old as dirt and very, very unkept. And it's not the fault of the districts or the localities, right?
I think that he has some difficulties. So when he comes back, we'll finish his thought. So he was talking about, schools just not being up to par. Question, what do you guys think? Is there a possibility that no matter who wins tonight, next week, whatever, that there will be a moratorium and all schools will shut down while we get COVID under control? Or is it possible? Or does the next president just say, you know what, we're going to do school as normal?
That's a tougher question. Like testing, there's a national directive on testing, and I think that that maybe is a little bit easier to get back to. The shutting down of the schools is going to require some sort of consensus around COVID being a threat. And it seems like in certain parts of the country where COVID is raging right now, especially, that is not seen as accurate. So I don't know how I don't see how the president could necessarily, unless he can build an amazing coalition, whether it's President Trump or President Biden. I don't see how you're going to see a nationwide decision on schools being open or shut. I don't see that. The way we have our federalist system, I don't see how that's even a remote possibility. I can see a similar thing with testing to how it happened in the spring, and the Secretary DeVos said, you apply and you can get your exemption. I can see. I don't know, man. I don't see a national consensus developing around closing schools. And I don't know if Mike wants to hop in and talk more about that thought he had about the infrastructure issue, which I actually thought was pretty crafty.
Yeah, sorry about that. My internet's a little laggy, but I agree. I actually also think that it's kind of irresponsible to make decisions nationwide around COVID, because there are rural communities that may or may not be impacted as strongly as maybe some urban or suburban communities. It's really hard to make those decisions unilaterally. My argument, to Adam's point, would be to provide guidelines, like federally led guidelines around, like, here are the exact things you're looking for in your community, and then allow districts to make decisions based on district by district, right? You're empowering them, people, with information. You're not empowering them with mandates. It's hard for me to see how that can be arguable at all across the board, Republican or Democrat, right? But back to my point earlier, which was about infrastructure, I actually think that the pandemic has caused quite a peek into our aging buildings and our lack of funding around new buildings for schools. We've seen schools lack of ventilation, schools needed to upgrade with new air circulation systems, like $500,000 on HEPA filters in school buildings. Like, all of that is crazy, ridiculous. And I think that has to be an issue that we have to talk about. Like, we're finding asbestos in schools, and we need to talk about that. We're finding out that, like, our scientifically recommended guidelines for air circulation in schools is severely lacking, and that's going to cause people to get sick and die, mostly adults, and that's a problem. And so if we don't address those things, then I think that we're sort of missing the boat here a little bit. And even if that means, like, block grants state by state to advocate for school physical restructuring and reform, right? That could be an easy solution. It wouldn't cause that much additional funding these days for rehabbing buildings that haven't been rehabbed in 50 years. So I think that if you're asking me on a day 2 issue, there's that. On a day 365 issue, and everyday issue, it's all school funding all the time. It's the most inequitable thing out there for schools. 365 days a week, school funding is a problem.
Absolutely. In Georgia, this last session, we had $1 billion cut from our education budget in the middle of a pandemic. It is maddening. So yes, thank you. Emma Kate says, case in point, AP tests are still going forward as planned, at least at this point, but to what student mental health costs? Janae, I think you were going to say something.
Yes. I was going to say, in regards to the idea that COVID can be handled on a local basis, I think schools and states and districts, Georgia is a good example, they've already failed at that in many cases. So while I understand wanting to give local control, they've already failed. So I think they've kind of lost any credibility that they could have. Here in Georgia, the governor has abdicated any responsibility for whether schools can be open or closed. And so each district can kind of do its own thing. So my district, where my kids go to school, where friends' kids go to school, is kind of on a hybrid where you can send your kids if you want or don't. It's fine. But we've got schools on a rolling closure schedule. We've got at least 1, sometimes 2 or 3 schools in the district closed at any given time Tomorrow, everybody won't go back because there will be schools who are under quarantine because they've got so many COVID cases, or the contact tracing is so complicated because kids are still, high schoolers are still moving around the building as they were pre-COVID. So try to contact trace. If you taught high school, you got 30 kids in the room, and then those 30 kids go to 7 classes and they all play sports, you got to shut the whole school down. So honestly, I don't trust superintendents at this point to make any decisions that just won't help extend their contracts and keep their jobs. Because again, teaching's not a vocation, it's a career. So these people are making decisions based on what's best for them and their pocketbooks and their careers, not necessarily what's best for the health of students, teachers, or families. On top of that, you said, teachers will get sick, teachers will die. I think what a lot of us forget are students are not healthy. So many of these kids come to school with pre-existing conditions. When I taught in South Carolina, I taught at one of the lowest income, most impoverished elementary schools in the state. It's right outside of Charleston, South Carolina. We had a clinic inside of our building with a physician. And I would venture to say half those kids were on some type of medication or some type of pre-existing condition. These kids are not healthy. So we're sending kids into these buildings under the guise that they're healthy and kids will they'll be fine. But a lot of these children have pre-existing conditions, diabetes 1 or 2. Almost every child I know has asthma. I mean, maybe it's just me, but these kids are really no more healthy than the adults, unfortunately, these days. And so sending children and adults back into a school building under the guise that, this area currently isn't being heavily affected by the pandemic. Well, that's because your kids aren't going to school. But as soon as you open the schools back up and people think everything is back to normal, the COVID cases rise so fast. And we've just been watching the data here in Fulton County schools. It's undeniable. The places where the people have their guard down the most are where the schools are constantly closing. You can predict it. I can probably tell you the next high school to close. That's how predictable it is, just based on what I see on social media. These parents posting these they're doing something called faux homecoming, because of course homecoming's been canceled, right? But no, little Johnny cannot be denied his dance and pictures for his junior year of homecoming. And so they're putting on these fake events where they've got 30, 40, 50 kids in their backyard at a fake homecoming dance, because I don't know why. I can't imagine it. But this is happening here in Fulton County. And then guess what? 2 weeks later, the school is closed. Well, of course it's closed. Y'all have been congregating in large grouping. And here we are again, putting these teachers at risk who have small children and, sick husbands and cancer patient parents living in their homes, but they don't get a choice. They have to go into the building in our district. They must go into the building. You can't teach from home. Even when all the kids were home, they didn't allow the teachers to teach from home. And then the teachers were just passing COVID around to each other. So I say all that to say I don't trust superintendents to make these decisions. I just don't.
And, I guess one of the questions, Rena just said this, I'm going to put it on here. She said she also doesn't trust the data. It's so highly flawed.
Don't trust the data.
In Missouri, parent reporting of child exposure, testing and results is 100%
don't
optional. I have to ask, and I know we're gonna end in a second, but what is the plan to get school back to normal? If you could advise the president,
there's no plan.
Well, what would be the plan? What if you were the advisor to the president? Let's say Biden wins, and you advise him on this is what you do to make schools operate and how they're supposed to. What would you say?
You got to close them first, and then reopen after picking them out of time. I think we lost Fran.
Keep going.
Okay, so you got to close them for a while first, and then we're gonna have to do some rapid testing at the door. I mean, I can't see any other way for schools to go back to normal than rapid testing at the door for everybody who crosses the threshold, and that's that. You can't bring your kid to school with a pink eye. If you have pink eye, noticeable pink eye, you can't come to school. If you have visible chicken pox, you can't come to school. Well, you can't see COVID. So the only way to know if you're bringing it in asymptomatic is to do rapid testing, and people are going to be angry about it in places where they think COVID's not serious, but I don't care because I want my kids to eventually go back to normal.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Adam, I'd love for you to chime in too, but I think testing, broad-based testing, close down all schools, and then that's number one. Number two is, all right, everybody gets tested. It doesn't matter who you are. And access to that testing has got to be really ubiquitous. And if you don't make access to testing ubiquitous, then you're not really solving any problems. Our biggest problem right now is that we have a lack of information. We don't know who has COVID, and it could be a little 4-year-old in your class you're teaching preschool, and that little kid has COVID and is asymptomatic, and you're 58 years old and you have asthma as an adult in that room, or the other 5-year-old in the room has asthma, then that presents a problem. And no one knows. No one knows. That's the issue here. I think so that would be number one for me again, would be testing. Adam, you wanna talk about testing at all?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think testing in this sense, COVID testing, is hugely important. And I think, that might be the thing. If Biden wins tonight, if Trump wins, we know what the message will be. If Biden wins, hopefully that would be one of the things that he does, is create this clear set of expectations that Mike kind of talked about. And I know, Janae, that you were a little skeptical about the local control, but I think that I agree with Mike on this, that like if the guidance is clear and consistent from leadership, then that enables local leaders to do better. Because the NIH, the CDC, like these guys, they sit around all day and think about like what happens if there's an infectious outbreak. And here we are. And like they have ideas about this. And the leadership, it's leadership's job to make sure that that information is disseminated in clear and tangible ways. And so I think the testing on a national basis can certainly happen. And at least, federal government helping to get tests to people and to states and local jurisdictions, that can happen. Again, we can have, the president can make a huge difference on that issue for sure. And so I think that that's big. But I also said, like on my notes here, I just said, it's not one thing. Like, I think so many of us think, oh, it's just going to be like one thing. Like, it's not one thing. Like, there's not one metric that we can look at and say, oh, that's it. COVID's over. It's a whole multitude of things, from, infectious positivity rates to, cases per 100,000, to, hospitalization numbers. Like there's a sea of data that's really important. I'm a social studies teacher. I every day I don't know what those numbers should look like, but there are people that are in government, in bureaucratic agencies, government agencies that do this, that know this, and we need leadership that disseminates that information to help people make good decisions. And so that's kind of I hope out of tonight that is what comes. And it may, but we'll have to wait and see.
Can I add one more thing too? Mm-hmm. I think that some of what we need to be prepared for is to be flexible, and for at least the next year to not look like normal school. Like, I think Janae's point is about like foam coming, right? Or whatever the heck it is, faux homecoming or whatever. Faux homecoming. I'm calling it foam coming because yes. I can just imagine these kids spraying foam all over one another, because why not? Right.
Why not?
And I think a lot of that is like a yearning for this like normalcy that I try to tell my students, like, be prepared to wear a mask for the next year in school until the end of 2022 school year. you need to be prepared to wear a mask in school. That's now normal, right? And so schools need to be a little bit more, and I might be a little doomsayer in that, but I think schools need to be a little bit more flexible with how they're approaching things. And I would argue that teachers and administrators need to be more flexible too. Like, I need to be more okay with my school saying, all right, this week we're open. Next week that might change. Then the week after that, we're going to be open. Then the week after that, that might change. It's like, you got to be able to be okay with a world that is like responding to a virus that doesn't care about normal. Like, the virus doesn't care about like foam coming or whatever, Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't care.
Word. And I'm like, foam. Right. What is
that? It is a thing. I got asked.
Yeah.
Are you guys having that in your part of the county? I said, no, we're not.
No, we don't.
No, that's not a thing down here.
So I would argue that has to be part of the plan, is like a commitment to flexibility. And then I think another part of the plan has to be like almost absurd amounts of contact tracing. Like, we need to increase the robustness of contact tracing across the country by investing real money in individuals that are going to call mercilessly to everybody around and say, who have you all been hanging out with? When were you all there with them? And, are you symptomatic? Like, those things need to happen. Without robust contact tracing and testing and clear guidelines and flexibility, those 4 things, there's no school like normal for the foreseeable future for anybody, in my point of view.
Yeah.
I think, to Mike, like, that's the other thing. Like, I think people hear like kids are going back to school, and normal school is not a thing. Like, that doesn't exist right now. There's no normal school. Like, where I am, if we're going back, it's not going to be 5-day-a-week school, probably, and that there's a whole nother a can of worms there. If you're going back to hybrid, like, hybrid has its own set of challenges where, are you doing asynchronous stuff with them 2 days a week and they're in the classroom, or are they just at home on their computers watching you teach while you're in your classroom with a third of the class and the other third showing up another day? And so, like, this, I said at the beginning, like, opening was always going to be harder. And this is part of it. Like, people, I want to be back to normal. Like, I want to say, good morning to my students and like interact with them. I am tired of having kindergarten over there and second grade over there, and my wife teaching 6th grade ELA on the other side. Like, I'm tired too. But like, going back to normal just is not going to happen right away.
Yeah.
And we need leadership to kind of let folks be reassured that, hey, yeah, this is how it should go. Even as uncertain as the future is, like, there's got to be some consistent messaging about, hey, yes, A, it will get better. B, it's going to take some time, though. And we may have some bumps along the way. But it's not just going to magically go away, and it's not just magically going to be normal again. Because if any, like, I've been pretty strict. Like, the idea of me being in a classroom with 30 other people right now, that's like, I haven't been in a room with 30 other people for 7 months, pretty much. Like, they don't just go jump back into that.
Yeah.
And certainly I don't like seeing 150 different people in one day. Like, that's simply unheard of right now. That is not happening in Adam Sutton's existence, and I suspect in a lot of Americans' existence.
And those are good points, because this is all not normal. And I'm gonna say this, because I know you guys, it's 8:30. We've been on for an hour and a half. It's crazy, great conversation. But one of the things that we have been, an epidemiologist told me this, and Janaea, you know what I'm gonna say. She said, hey, that the last time we saw a pandemic like this was HIV/AIDS, right? And when HIV/AIDS hit, that it was very common beforehand for people not to wear condoms, have unprotected sex. And when it hit gay men and gay Black and Hispanic men hardest. And one of the things she said is that we can reopen schools, but not until we get a handle on it. And we don't have a handle on it. And that, this is the new normal. So I appreciate each and every one of you guys for coming on tonight. We might come back on in the next couple of days, probably Friday, if we have a winner announced, which hopefully we will. And these conversations are critical because teachers have got to understand that teaching is political. Just you getting up and teaching your children, and we're seeing this more and more as we are 8 months into COVID, and teachers are being asked to solve a health crisis that we didn't start. So everybody, tell them where they can find you. If they have questions, they want to converse, we'll see you on, I'll say Friday. And if you guys want to come back, let me know, because hopefully we'll have a winner announced, and then we can start talking all kinds of goodies. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Find me on January 21st. Okay, that's what I want. The day after inauguration, right? Talk to me then. I don't have PTSD from 2016 or anything. Just saying, not at all.
Like, hold up, this is not called. This is very clear. I was like, thank you for saying that, because that is needed. But I get it. I get it.
So on January 21st, you can get me at. Now you can find me on Twitter at Michael T. Dunn. You can find me on Insta at the same handle. You'll love my photos of food and the outdoors. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Michael T. Dunn as well. Be out there, be safe, enjoy time with your families if you can make that time happen. And, if you haven't voted yet, I'm sorry to hear that. 4 more years, you can vote then, but catch you all around.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, goodness. Where can you find me? You can find me on Instagram at Modern Polish at Home. And you can probably find me arguing on the internet at South Fulton Parents for Education. Putting parents in their place one post at a time. No, seriously. Probably. I'm not really. She's laughing because I'm really not kidding. And I don't tweet very much. I would have to look up my Twitter handle, but I think it's at wifemomdiva81, because that's how much I don't use it.
Thank you, Janae. And she came on. She had like 30 minutes. I was like, Janae, you want to hop on? It's always good to have people with strong opinions on, because conversation can keep going. Adam,
yes, this was fun.
So yeah, you can find me on Facebook. That's probably my most active social media. Although I did watch The Social Dilemma lately, and so my social media intake has gone down a little bit. But I'm I'm in the chat that's going on for the live stream right now. Adam Sutton on Facebook, and then my Twitter, which I told you last time, I'm working on my Twitter game. Did the Twitter chat last time, so I'm at Mr. Sutton. That's counted. That's spelled out MISTER Sutton 1 on Twitter. So hit me up there. Try to see if you can pull me back.
I love it. And guys,
I just followed you both on there, and you're right. It is Wife Diva 81. There you go. You got it.
So guys, remember, you can check out www.theeducatorsroom.com. We're always looking for fresh voices, teachers to write. The power in teachers are our voices and our collective action. So let's remember that, and don't get discouraged tonight. I'm going to go watch a little bit of coverage, and then I'm going to take some melatonin and go to bed, and I'll see you guys in the morning. Have a good one.